Advanced fitting opportunities. Period.
Big picture, two, and that's being generous. Like I want it to be 5,
1.5.
like, yeah, my heart says 5, my brain says 1, so we'll get to 1.5, and we can talk about that if you want.
What is up, everybody? How you living? NoPuttsGiven. We're back. The time has changed. Well, the time hasn't changed. We're on at the same time-ish, but we've survived the time change, which has necessitated a much darker apparel situation for both of us. I'm in mourning.
It's fall.
I hate the time change. I wish it would just stay the way that it was. I don't know. How many people, raise your hands real quick, if you love it getting dark at like 4:50 p.m. You like eating your dinner in the pitch black.
So awesome. Really.
Can't we all agree?
My dog is very confused.
Yeah, dogs don't care. Humans do. I don't know. I was hoping we could kind of move past that, but I guess not. Anyway, we do have some fun equipment stuff to talk about, some prognostications, if you will, for the upcoming year, things we're hearing, sensing, feeling, and otherwise absorbing information and coming up with some ideas, some questions on simulator golf. It's all the rage. But before we get to some of that, 1.3 billion. I'm hearing that I'm talking PGA Tour Live just really fast because we don't really know. But there's a report that's out. This was like the Sun, I think, UK, a couple other media.
It's a sketchy report. Nobody's low confidence reporting.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of people said, asked me like, "Hey, what do you know about this?" And it's like, well, nothing. I mean, other than the nothing of value, meaning based on what's rumored, loosely connected to some potentially reasonable sources. Maybe.
I heard it from a guy who knew a guy who said, yeah.
But you may hear this number thrown around, 1 billion or to like 1.3 billion Saudi public investment fund, potentially investing in the for-profit entity, the PGA Tour Enterprise is the for-profit entity part of that. It would give them like an 11% stake in that part, a couple seats on the board. But as far as all the important questions, could players come back? Would you play on both tours? What would the events look like? Would they get world ranking points? All these things that actually matter, don't have any info on that. So, nothing new there. But I know you're interested in latching onto this story, Tony. Some new equipment coming out. Let's talk this.
Yeah, let's do that.
K-Star. Talk to me, Goose. What do we got? What is this thing? Vokey K-Star. Talk to me.
This is a new grind. One we haven't seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Vokey WedgeWorks offering. Kudos to Vokey / Titleist for what they're doing with WedgeWorks and now starting to crank things out. This is the busiest WedgeWorks year I've ever seen, and I think it's awesome. But so K-Star, new grind, probably helpful to start with where it came from.
Let's start there.
And I've heard 2 stories. Okay, I've heard 2 versions of the origin, so I'm going to step you through both.
Take me through
and both. Then at the end, you can decide which one you think is most plausible. So let's get some props out as we go through this. So let's start here, right? So
let's do that.
I'm going to say like one version that I heard is that like, all right, let's start. We got a T grind here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
my favorite, my baby.
T grind goes to the bar. Yeah, hanging out with her friends, and when you see like, she's slim, right? Really slim, right
pretty
here
narrow
in the midsection,
there.
But curves in all the right places.
Oh,
you know what I'm talking about here. So T grind's hanging out at the bar, and then then low bounce K comes in, right?
Uh-huh.
He's kind of a wide boy, like he's a big boy.
Mm-hmm. There's some width to K grind,
but he's smooth, right? He's smooth. So he comes up and he sidles up to T grind and he's like, "Hey, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing?
And T grind's into it, and one thing leads to another. some bag chatter, and then like 9 months later,
bag chatter.
Well, I don't know. Maybe not 9 months. If I'm going to be honest about anything here, it's that I have no idea what the gestational period of a wedge is. But 9 months later, or this week,
whatever,
K-Star pops out.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you see with K-Star is a little bit wide, like a daddy.
Yep, it's got daddy.
A little bit of a big boy there,
width.
But look at the curves.
Mm-hmm.
But look at the curves.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So that's one version.
Okay.
Maybe you believe that's how it went down. Or I'll give you an alternative reality.
Do we need an alternative? I think that makes sense.
I don't know. I mean, I would
low bounce K grind and T grind walk into a bar.
Yeah. So
origin story.
So that's one version of events.
Right.
More realistic. So we've got this low bounce K.
Yep.
Right? And the signature feature of the low bounce K is, as the name suggests, it is a low bounce wedge.
Yep.
But the signature defining feature of the K grind is this really wide sole.
Meaning that it makes it great for what? Like, what does that wide sole generally get you?
Yeah, I mean, just broadly speaking, in terms of like, forget about MOI. When we talk about forgiveness in a wedge, largely comes from the sole.
Yeah.
And so, as a couple ways to get there, right? You can go with more bounce, or you can go with a wide sole. Or in the case of the standard K grind, you go with a wide sole with a lot of bounce, right? That's kind of like the ultimate in wedge forgiveness. With this, you get kind of that forgiveness in that it's not as prone to digging as other. This is a 4-degree bounce wedge, right? So really low bounce, but
which
less
prone to digging. Well, just so people
know, yeah. We're now talking multiple 4-degree bounce options within the,
which is the lowest bounce stamped bounce number that Vokey offers. Period. Right.
So yeah, wide sole gives you kind of protection from digging. Also makes it really good out of bunkers, right? Like so. Kind of an enhanced bunker wedge.
Yep.
Now we go the other route, the T grind.
Yep.
What's awesome about the T grind is when you get this heel and toe relief, right, and this trailing edge relief back here as well.
Yep.
It wants to sit really close to the ground. So what we have is a situation where Webb Simpson. This goes back almost a decade, really. So Webb Simpson is doing some experimenting, messing around with the low bounce K, and it's like, hey, I like this, but wouldn't it be cool if it was more forgiving or more versatile? Rather, can I get some? I would like some added versatility. So, our good friend, our friend anyway, Aaron Dill goes to work on the grinding machine and starts, creating some angles, if you will, changing some angles and whatnot. And then over time, more and more players were like, hey, this is kind of cool. Can we tweak this, tune this, whatever? And that eventually gets us to where we are today with this K-Star grind.
Yeah.
And what you're getting, so you're effectively kind of starting with a low bounce K, right? Yep. That's your starting point.
Genesis of it.
Kind of see like this little crescent here. So that's what Vokey calls pre-worn leading edge, right? You kind of get aggressively grinding there, and that helps it sit closer to the ground in the square position.
Yep. But doesn't it also kind of help with to like, because you think about like to the degree that you're going to hit partial shots, pitches up to maybe 40 yards, 60 yards, maybe even using 3/4 stuff, that's going to generally be a square face shot. And if anything, that's where the low bounce gets scary, like on a T grind, right? Because if you catch it a little bit heavy,
you're a lot heavy real fast.
You go from a little heavy to a lot heavy in chunk city, right? Where that pre-worn leading edge helps mitigate some of that a little bit. So you talk about forgiveness being in the grind and then the sole. To me, that makes that a little bit more forgiving for players that use their 60-degree for, hey, I hit this up to 50, 80, 90 yards. I'm going to hit 3/4 shots from the fairway with a square face. That pre-worn leading edge, again, it doesn't look like much, and it's not something that you're probably going to read a ton about because it's not the flagship feature of the wedge, but I think it's a completely underrated yet super, super important part of that particular wedge. And something people struggle with all the time that play a low bounce wedge is chunking shots from the
Yeah, it
fairway.
helps you kind of like it kind of again makes it look like it's sitting more underneath the ball, but because you've got that wider sole, you're not going to get that digging.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Love that.
the rest of it, right, is a little bit of, again, you see that influence from Mama, right? That tee grind, that heel and toe, and a little bit of trailing edge relief as well. So you get enhanced versatility, more versatile than you would get with a low bounce K. Now, is this sort of just a wide body tee grind? No. Like it's when you open this up, it sits closer to the ground than a K grind, but it's not
like
that
that's
tight
what
like
T does.
like a T. Yeah.
T grind is
So
to be the more versatile, hit everything, Ginsu knife, do whatever you want to do around the green. Again, it's my favorite wedge. It's my go-to. I love it. But I could see, depending on not even just turf conditions, but say bunker conditions, things where it's like, where would a wider sole be more advantageous throughout a round? You really think about that, and then you go, okay.
You get into especially soft bunkers.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, again, it really is. It's horses for courses, and what you need out of that spot in the bag. And I say that with wanting golfers to understand. Like, I get there's a cost associated with this, right?
Totally.
Wedges cost money, but it's not necessarily universally true that you should just have one lob wedge. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Right? So I have, I've talked about moving from T when it's dry to the V grind when it gets softer, which is just effectively a higher bounce T grind.
Right.
This is a little bit different in that it's sort of like a relieved low bounce K. So there's some overlap, but some true distinctions as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's for everybody. We're getting definitely into niches within niches when we talk about, hey, this is a 4-degree lob wedge with a wide sole, but also heel toe trailing edge relief and a pre-worn leading edge. But it has its place.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, in terms of, last 10 years, 15 years, whatever, the most consistent we've seen individual releases coming out of WedgeWorks throughout a season. Why do you think that is? Because again, WedgeWorks is basically, for people that don't know, maybe it's Vokey's, if you want to call it a special edition, limited edition, it's a place where they'll release, smaller quantities of a particular grind. Again, it's not something that's going to fit absolutely everybody, but it's their unique, special, different small batch releases. We've seen more of those this year and kind of more of a regular cadence. Why do you think Vokey's gone that route as opposed to what they've done in the past?
I think there's kind of been some rethinking of the wedge business. So you look, right, they've got 24, 25, I think, off the top of my head, loft bounce grind combinations in the retail line. Yep. That's already a fairly exhaustive number.
Right.
And we know already that kind of overwhelms golfers. But moving beyond that, right, you have things like
5 grinds overwhelms golfers.
Right. But you get into like this V grind and, we see earlier the A plus, right? And now K star.
Yeah.
As well as things like L grind, which got swapped in the main lineup for T, but a lot of golfers like it, right? Mm-hmm. Similarly, low bounce K, not in the main lineup, but has been like a WedgeWorks staple for years. And it's kind of this realization of, hey, we have a lot of these grinds. They're in use on tour. We think that they will work for some golfers, not the masses like the retail lineup, but they have a utility, they have a purpose, especially for guys who know about them, understand how the grind works, are willing to go get fit or do some trial and error on their own. So the thinking is like, we have all this stuff, why not make it available? And I've talked about this before, being particularly frustrated with like finding the V grind I've talked about it being like the ultimate fall golf wedge for me. Finding that in the SM9
was kind of your white whale was to,
Right. And then SM10 launches, spring, still soft. So, kind of those shoulder seasons for regular golfers.
Mm-hmm.
And Vokey essentially said, you know what? You got to wait. Maybe we'll roll that out in 2 years like we did last time. But, this year they're like, let's get V grind out there pretty quick. Right. Let's get L grind out right away.
Right.
Almost. Right. And it's really just understanding that, hey, that these things already exist. There are people that want them. Why not make them available more easily, more readily, and more quickly. And so now, as we roll into kind of next season, can't talk about it. Vokey's going to be doing some other things within
Right.
the WedgeWorks platform
Right.
that I
We'll
think
be
is
able to
going to be
talk
pretty
about it
exciting
at
as
some
well. So
point. And again, we
yeah,
won't hold out on you. We'll get there as soon as we can. We don't want to be, forcefully breaking embargoes and whatnot. So we're getting there.
and it's really, from a kind of a golfer's perspective, I guess the utility of it. It's nice to see things that are limited or um, refresh, right? New additions to the lineup,
Sure.
changes, additions, whatever you want to call it, that are functional and purposeful versus purely cosmetic.
Right.
So I
Right.
love that too.
Right. Not just black irons or, hey, we're going to do this in a different color way where it's like, okay, that's cool, but these are functionally different. And so what to watch for? We started talking about this a little bit because, again, by this point in the year, we're getting close to embargo season, which we kind of talk about as our new launches. Between now and the middle of January, just an overwhelming amount of equipment and new products are going to hit the market, and a good deal of those, right, are going to be, call it, late December to late January, kind of that month, because we got people are still trying to sell through stuff now. You got the holiday season. We have a couple launches coming here and there where a couple companies want to maybe either get ahead of that particular noise or somehow distance themselves from the cacophony of what is the January embargo launch season. But we started connecting some dots and just things that you're hearing. You see trends. You wrote an article we published on Monday about basically what the hell is 10K. So I identified 5 different trends, things that I'm hearing, multiple things in, for 2025. And the first thing I want you to do on a scale of 1 to 5, you're just going to rank them in terms of how important do you think this trend will be to the consumer. So not to you, not to me, not to anybody else, but for your average golfing consumer, how excited should they be to pay attention to this trend? All right, scale of 1 to 5. Here we go. You ready? Mini drivers.
2.
2. All right.
Super niche, but fun, but still super niche.
No torque, zero torque, torqueless, whatever you want to call them, putters.
That's 5. To
Ooh.
me, that is the 5.
Okay. And we're going to come back and go through these.
Okay.
HL irons. So higher launching irons in the game improvement space.
4.
4. Okay. 10K drivers.
3.
3. Ooh, only 3. Advanced fitting opportunities. Period.
Oh. Big picture. 2, and that's being generous. Like I want it to be 5.
1.5.
Like, yeah, my heart says 5, my brain says 1, so we'll get to 1.5, and we can talk about that if you want. But yeah.
All right, just because we've talked about some of these things before, so we don't need to beat dead horses and whatnot. But in the mini driver space, again, we talk about these as, in a largely undefined area, because we say, what is a mini driver? Well, it's something that's smaller than your 460cc driver, but bigger than what's traditionally a big fairway wood. So call that 175 to maybe even close to 200 cc's. So it's something, let's say, in between 200 cc's of volume and 340
It's almost 4.
to
I mean, right?
400. So we got
Almost.
So we got this area of, this is just for argument's sake, call it 200 to 400. So bigger than a fairway wood, smaller than a driver. I'm giving it a 2 for the mini driver part, but I'm giving it a 5 in terms of getting golfers to think about doing something different than driver, 3-wood, 5-wood. Stock, driver, 15-degree 3-wood, 18-degree 5-wood, and on you go.
I'll accept that. If for no other reason, like we see this wedge category is probably a great example where golfers when they buy a new thing, they buy the new thing that spec wise matches the old thing. and give very little consideration to whether or not it makes sense. And again, going to the wedge category, we talk about a lot of guys are still buying, 52, 56, 60
Right.
as their set of wedges. And you're
It's
like,
standard, whatever. Yeah.
like, dude, your pitching wedge is 43, 44 degrees.
Right.
Like you gotta rein that gap wedge. You gotta strengthen that. Otherwise, you've got like this gap, and obviously, when you change the gap, everything kind of snowballs from there. So
Yeah.
and likewise, we talk about, hey, you used to buy a 3-wood, 5-wood? Do you really need to continue to do that? Are you better served with maybe a 4-wood and a 7-wood, or do
Yep.
you even need, permutations, right? A lot of different ways to address a lot of different spots in the bag. And so, yeah, I agree with you. Anything that makes golfers even take a moment of thought to go, hey, what do I really need here? What is it I'm actually trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
And did the specs of the old thing really do that, or do I need to go in a different direction?
Yeah, and the thing where, for me personally, it's more like a 3 to 4 in interest because of how it could be used. And what I mean by that is really getting people to think, okay, where do you use this club and how often and for what purpose? And again, it's funny, you and I, in so many ways, we get fit for clubs, we end up in a very similar endpoint more often than not, but oftentimes for different reasons. But one thing that we've agreed on, both of us, like with our 3-wood and how we use it, or that next wood, is it's a distance club. I'm trying to hit this thing as far and as straight as I can, and not in a way that overlaps with my driver. So I do care about the carry distance, but only insofar as it helps me get to a total number that's longer, you know? And from that perspective, I go, does a mini driver potentially help me achieve that better, given that I do want to be able to comfortably hit it off the deck, off the fairway, maybe a handful 2 to 3 times around? I'm interested. I'm
Yeah,
intrigued.
and that's why I think, I don't know where you are on it, but me, I'm much more interested in a mini driver that's closer to 300, below 300 even.
Mhm.
I really just want an extra large fairway wood versus, kind of the direction. And it's not a knock, right? It was
Yeah.
Callaway kind of went the other
Yeah,
direction
they
and
went to,
made a
like,
big one.
340, right?
350. Is it 340, 350? I don't know. It's printed on the head. I got one here. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's the biggest one we've ever seen in the mini driver category.
Mhm.
And again, it's just a decision,
Big
a
mini.
design philosophy. Who are we making this for, and what is that golfer trying to achieve? So
Right.
that's a decision point there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm super intrigued by that, no doubt. We talked about the putters, the zero torque, no torque, the great torque off of 2025 testing. We went through a lot of that stuff last week and whatever. Big area, what did you give it?
I gave that 5.
I know
I
you
think I think
did.
of the opportunities we're talking about, this is the one that has the the probability or the likelihood to impact the most golfers in a positive way.
Mhm.
Like, I've seen enough from
Quickly.
Lab, the early returns on the PXG Allen, right? There are lots of indications that this is going
Huh?
to these type of designs for golfers who are willing to try them. And the more companies that come out and the more they start to look like conventional putters, the more golfers will gravitate to them or at least be willing to try them.
Yeah.
And this is the one where I think we have an opportunity for a lot of guys to try it, embrace it, and ultimately putt better before it. Because I don't always pay attention necessarily to the minute details of the guys that are playing with the game, but
Sure.
as kind of as I've seen the labs start to crop up in more bags, I've started to pay more attention to how guys putt, not just with lab but without them. And I find myself looking at something, thinking, "How are you so bad at this?" Like, this should be, to me, the easiest part of the game, and you see guys struggle with it, and
Sure.
that's just reality.
Yeah.
Not trying to crap on anybody, but guys struggle with their putting, and so
Yeah.
if you've got something that there's some evidence to suggest, like, yeah, this is really going to help you out.
Yeah.
That's more so than I think anything else on the list in terms of the potential, because it's two pieces, right? What is the potential,
Uh-huh.
and then are golfers willing to embrace it in a way that maximizes that potential? And this is the one where those two come together. And I say, yeah, this is 5. This is the 5 for me.
Yeah, it's a 5 for me too, because like you said, I think there's going to be much more choice. So whereas, a year ago, if you really wanted something like this, you probably went with Lab, maybe one other brand. Axis had their stuff. And again, I know they're not all exactly the same, and I'm not suggesting that they are. But when it's more like, hey, if I can go to any car dealership and they have an SUV that's a certain size, and I kind of know that every brand's going to have something that kind of fits that category, and I go, ooh, okay, I really like this company, but I don't like that company or whatever. Okay, now we're kind of into something. And again, I'll go back to, this is, it's Scott Fawcett, it's Lou Stagner, it's what we know about strokes gained, is that going from a 10 handicap to lower single digits, or going from a bogey golfer like my dad, go from being an 18 handicap to a 12, it's not about making more birdies. It's about eliminating double bogeys. It's about not 3-putting so often, etc. And taking somebody that maybe doesn't practice a ton or isn't invested and say, hey, I'm going to do some speed training and see if I can get another 5 miles an hour ball speed on my tee shot. Whatever. Okay. Putting is such a simple way to potentially reduce that. So if you can take somebody and that for every 10 strokes you drop in average score, probably 7 or 8 of those, are going to come from fewer double bogeys, not more birdies. Well, what's one of the quickest ways to eliminate bogeys and double bogeys? For a lot of guys, it's 3 putts. So I don't know. I love that one. I certainly do. I think that one's definitely going to be there. 10K. We'll post the article. People can read about it. It's not the panacea. It's not the cure-all that some people think it is, according to your article. Why not?
Yeah, for me, and there's nothing I would say that's bad about 10K, right? There's a need in the marketplace for the most forgiving driver you can make.
Sure.
But kind of the point I made is, like, look, the marketing is new, right? It's a bigger breakthrough, arguably, in marketing than actual performance. We talk about Ping G425, right? That was the max, already 10K in some configurations. So we're kind of already there. And a lot of the drivers on the market today in the max category are all not 10K, but they're not way far off.
Right.
And so,
right.
And the thing to keep in mind too with MOI, there are diminishing returns. So as I've talked about before, just talking about that IYY, that heel to toe conventional MOI, when we think about it, when you go from like super low MOI, call it, like what SLDR was,
like 4,000 IYY, right?
Yeah.
So like your heel toe forgiveness being SLDR is probably sub 4,000, but
yeah. So you go from really low to say, you go from say 4,000 to 5,000, which would be the low end for, 5,000 is where LS drivers live. Your low spin stuff is plus or minus 5. Like, that's a huge jump.
Yeah. From 4,000 to 5,000 is mega jump.
Right. And so, but the jump from 5,000 to 5,900, that limit, that's the actual real world, excuse me, real world. There we go. Real world implications of that are not nearly what they are in that first jump, right? You're getting less bang for the buck on that. And so, and that's, what are you getting from going from 9,000 to 10,000 total MOI when we, add A plus B and, aggregate that way. So these things to an extent already kind of existed. Right. And in terms of 10K, we've never heard that before. Big number, but not that much bigger than where we were last year or 2 years before that even. So,
yeah. Well, and I think the important point, one of the most important points to pull out of that entire article, is that you're combining two numbers that are actually different things. And it's like combining two statistics that are kind of related, but not entirely related, and putting them together as a single number. And that's the part where, we've talked to R&D guys in different companies where we get some pushback around Yeah, it's a little bit of fuzzy math, not the math itself, because hey, 5,900 plus, 4,125 still gets us to, I mean, it's just addition, right? But you're talking about forgiveness on a club head, heel toe forgiveness. So how far I hit it off the center toward the toe or toward the heel, that resistance to twisting and that, okay, that's one number. And then how far I hit it off that center from top to bottom is another number. We just add them together, but those are actually different things. So to me, that's where it gets more murky than
you got
anything.
one number that I guess in golf terms, right, is a driver's ability to retain ball speed. That's
Right.
your heel toe, right? That's what that
Yep.
number, the primary function is retained ball speed
Yep.
or reduce ball speed loss on,
Whatever. Yeah.
however you want to phrase it. Whereas your IXX value, right, that top to bottom primarily is about spin consistency.
Right.
A little bit of ball speed retention there, but primarily spin consistency. I was like struggling to find an analogy, couldn't really come up with one. And this is lame as hell, but hopefully it helps convey what we're talking about here. And I was like, it's sort of like taking a cheetah's ability to run fast and its ability to jump high and combining that into a total big cat score.
Right.
And you kind of say, like, let's do it with lions and tigers and leopards, and we'll get the total
Yeah.
big cat score for all of these things. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
maybe for me, the spin consistency piece is actually more important than the ball
They're
speed piece, or
related,
vice versa. Yeah, it's
but
not.
depending on what you want, I mean, it's speed and quickness. There's some guys that have it both. You take a Tyreek Hill, he's very fast straight line, and he's also very, very quick in space. But there's other guys that are really, really quick, but maybe not super, super fast. And there's some guys that are straight line, crazy fast, but maybe relatively speaking, they're not as quick in small spaces. And so it's and that's where, and that's always the hard part with marketing, because you want to paint it in a way that's simple and easy and intelligible for all golfers to understand, so in hopes they'll buy it, right, based on that. But when we look just a hair deeper, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing all the time. So I'm not saying don't get a 10K driver. Perfectly fine. There's a lot of reasons. You may be the person that is best fit into that driver, and there's going to be a lot of people that are. But it's also kind of a thing of like, how do we decouple it so people actually know what they're getting into?
Yeah, it's really trying to get the golfers to understand, like, just because 10K exists and it sounds new and uber forgiving and all of that, that you don't actually need
Yeah.
it. And there are trade-offs, which I listed in the article, that come with that, and reasons why maybe 10K isn't for you.
Right.
So it's
Right.
just think, right?
Yep.
Understanding the ramifications of all the different pieces, and start to understand what is actually going to work best for you, and what 10K ultimately
Yeah.
really means.
All right. HL irons. So we're talking about high launch irons, meaning typically, and this goes back to like maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, most irons in the game improvement space companies sold based on increased distance. Hey, you're a game improvement golfer, you need help, right? And in so many cases, that was, I want to hit my irons longer. But the dirty little secret and some stuff in there was, well, if we just decrease the loft, loft jacking, your 7-iron went from 32 degrees to 28 degrees. Now you hit it a club further, but that's easy to show on paper, maybe even in some tests, depending on what ball you use and these things, whatever. But what became abundantly clear over time was, yeah, you may be hitting a greater total distance, but that doesn't necessarily help you shoot a lower score.
No, we talked about this multiple times. This idea, like, we saw it very early. One of the, say, like, maybe only the second or third round of iron testing I ever did. I was blown away because we had some slow to mid speed guys in the test,
Mm-hmm.
and I was shocked by how low their pitching wedges flew. Because you think pitching wedge, right? That's goes way up high and then comes down and lands soft.
Yeah.
And the trajectory for a lot of these guys for their pitching wedge looked like my 3-iron, back in the day when I carried one.
Yeah, they're coming in at 38 degrees, 39 degrees. You're saying there's not a green in America that you're going to hold on that trajectory unless you happen to hit it on the very front. The ball hits into an upslope and stop. I mean,
yeah, and there are a lot of guys who like to play that way, right? I'm going to land it short, roll it up, and that's fine. Except, all right, well, what happens if there's water in front of the green?
Well, and I wonder too, like, do they like to play that way, or have they adapted and they have to play that way? So therefore,
just kind of learned out of necessity.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I called it a 4.
Yeah.
The HL irons, and it's almost where the golf companies have acknowledged very quietly, like, yeah, you know what? It turns out we've been kind of boning these golfers for a number of years.
We sold a shit ton of golfer. We sold a lot of irons that way on distance because that is like the lowest hanging fruit. But
we're going to give them what they want because everybody wants distance. So we're just going to give golfers that, but we're not really going to give any real consideration to whether that distance, the way that it's being delivered, is actually helpful. And I think, again, when you're kind of these low bullets all day long, that's not helpful. And so you can give a guy the ability to hit the ball higher so that it lands softer, carries farther in doing so. And hey, maybe I'll talk to you about a golf ball too, and how you can get a little bit more still.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to feel, if nothing else, right? If you've been playing your whole life and remember a time when your pitching wedge flew like that, if we can get you closer to that feeling, that aesthetic, and help you lower scores at the same time, and not cost you distance in the process, that's a win for everybody. So I think.
Well, and here's the thing, and the simplest way to define golf, and we've talked about this before, is like, the number one job from the tee is to get the ball on the green in the fewest strokes possible. Get the ball from the tee to the green in as few strokes as you can. Then once you're on the green, get it in the hole as few strokes possible. And so we know if you had to pick just one stat, greens in regulation, how many times am I on the green in 1 on a par 3, in 2 on a par 4, in 3 on a par 5? That's going to directly translate probably most accurately to the score that you end up shooting. And I think for game improvement golfers, where this is something that can directly help them hit more greens, which is going to directly lead to lower scores. So I think this is a huge one. Last one, fitting. You wanted to give it a 5 in your heart, but you gave it a 1 or something, 1.5. Yeah, but we're hearing and we're going to see some stuff, some pretty wild stuff, in fact, from a couple mainline brands that we've already seen how they are going. This is like major emphasis for these companies in terms of what they're talking about, how they're talking about the products. And I don't get that it's just the sense of like, hey, we couldn't come up with a lot better technology this time around, so we're going to lean into something else. I think it's more like, well, there's only so many things that we can do on the performance side. Are we kind of hitting some walls there? And man, this is an untapped resource. So you want to give it a 5, but you're going to give it a 1. Why the discrepancy?
Yeah. So I think in terms of what is going to make the most meaningful difference for golfers, if you're going to buy something new, right? How are you going to maximize the performance of that new shiny thing? It's through fitting, right?
Sure.
Like, you should be fit. We talk about this. Every club in the bag. We've got the data that shows that doesn't happen. Almost nobody gets fit for putters.
Right.
Nobody gets fit for hybrids and utility irons. When people get fit for wedges, it's almost invariably on the back of iron fittings. Irons, a little bit different story, if only because there's really almost nobody has stock inventory anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Drivers, probably more
in some level of fitting, even if it's just, hey, shaft length or loft length, lie.
So I think, the potential to benefit from fitting is 5. It is probably more as we talk about all these new technologies, right? Over the years.
Right.
I don't think there's any single technology that is more beneficial, at least not, in the last 10 years, that is more beneficial than just getting fit for the clubs you're going to buy.
That technology is so good, you don't have to be fit. Like,
But we also know that the golfers aren't going to do it. They're not going to.
I know.
Or when they do it, they're going to do, again, we've talked about the idea that, fitting isn't one thing. There are multiple definitions, varying degrees of fitting.
Right.
And so are you going to go to a fitter that has every tool at their disposal to get you dialed in? Or are you going to go to a fitter that, in the interest of the scale of their fitting shop, for example, is not going to be able to leverage the tools that the manufacturers are trying to give them?
Sure.
And,
there's a
we'll
lot
have
of
some context to that later, but it's imperfect. And again, the obstacle is golfers. I don't want to say unwillingness, because we know in a lot of cases golfers are willing to go get fit, but it's still surprising to me, but I know it's real that fitters aren't on every corner.
No, it's
even in my area,
time. Right? It's all of these factors that we've discussed.
And I say this all the time. Like, for me personally, right, and I'm fortunate, right? I go and travel the country sometimes just to get fit for golf clubs. But even I'm here in Saratoga, New York. And for me to go to a fitter that I have full confidence in, or if somebody comes to me and says, where should I go? Full confidence. I'm saying, look, you're going to have to go up to Canada, the Ontario area, to see
you're going down to
Ian
Pete's,
Fraser.
Maybe?
Like go see Ian up in Ontario with whatever his new venture proves to be. I'm sure it's still in fitting. Or go to Long Island and see my guys at Pete's. Go see Sonny. Go see Kurt. Go see
those guys are awesome. Yeah. But again, it's a level of investment, both time, cost, all of these things. I was talking to one of my other buddies the other day, and he was like, it's not the cost of fitting that bothers me as much. It's the cost of the stuff that I then get fit for. So it's not the $250 or whatever I get fitting all that information. That's great. But then I'm at this place now, because of how they do stuff, it's $1,000 driver. It's $2,500 for the set of irons. It's this wedge that I can buy off the rack for $180. It's now $280. Like, what are we doing here? So it's not that I'm apprehensive or adverse to paying something for a fitting. It's that even if I do get to roll that cost into new clubs, it's like, okay, that's fine. I'm not worried about taking the test drive. I'm worried about the fact that it's Ferrari pricing on the other end. So why do this when I know I'm only going to get roped into that on the other side?
Well, that goes back to the conversation we had with Ian, a few weeks ago, right? This idea of, like, one of the most important questions a fitter should be asking you when you go in for a fitting is what is your budget?
Right.
And that's where it starts. And so, like, a good fitter, if he knows your budget, he's not going to fit you. And if you tell him, hey, look, I've got $650, just to throw out a number, right? I've got $650. That is my absolute ceiling on a driver. A good fitter is never going to put that auto flex, to use an example,
into just any head, right? Budget on a shaft.
Exactly. So that's that's almost entirely on the fitter and on the golfer to communicate that before you get to the other end. And you're like, what do you mean it costs this?
It's hard if your business model is really based entirely on upselling or getting people out of their price range, but story for a different day. And like I said, we're going to get into more simulator stuff, maybe not on this episode, because I got a lot more things I want to dive into than we probably have time for. So
we went long.
Bank that one for next week, because why not? But maybe you have questions about simulator stuff. Go ahead.
We were telling a wedge grind love story.
It's a wedge grind love story, and sometimes those things just happen. So find us, follow us on the interwebs. There's all these things out there. Ask us questions. Some of this trend stuff, I'm very interested to, I don't know, hear what you think. So until next time, we out.